Godzilla, King of the Monster, 2019. Retelling by Kyero Nelma. Preface. Godzilla is the property of Toho Co. Limited. He is currently licensed by Toho to Legendary Pictures, partner with Warner Bros. Studios. This is a fan-made retelling of the 2019 film Godzilla King of the Monsters, written by Michael Dougherty and Zach Shields, based on the story by Max Borenstein. Much like I did for my 2014 retelling, both old and new, I will be attempting to rewrite the film's major events while remaining true to the original vision as much as possible. The plot will remain largely the same, with only a few minor deviations meant to enhance and support the intended stories being told within. For example, 1. You will see much more hinted at early on and explained later in the stories about Ghidorah's cosmic origin. 2. The entire Russell family will be far more developed than they were in the film, so that their collected grief is more strongly felt and, more importantly, seen in the way they behave and interact with one another as well as the others in the story. 3. You will see the lore expanded upon and made more logically consistent, such as why Ghidorah's alien core would have affected any of Earth's Titan, given that he's not part of our natural order and thus not actually an alpha species. This planet's inhabitants should recognize and respect or follow. I would like to take this time to thank you for visiting this story, and I encourage you to leave comment relevant to the chapter you read. If you find something you don't like, feel free to speak up. I am not one of those people who belittles differing opinions. I welcome them. If you think I could have done something better, feel free to leave constructive criticism. I thrive on it. I encourage all my readers to be vocal and speak your minds openly about the story. Thank you all again so much for being here, and I hope you enjoy the story. Kyero Nelma. Chapter 1. Memories of San Francisco. The silhouette of what was left of the Golden Gate district of the once proud city of San Francisco was perfectly outlined by the fading sun, which blanketed land, air, and water alike in the red light. Fire ceaselessly assaulted the landscape in the wake of a titanic battle still taking place further inland, and high in the skies above were the descending flashlights of the city's last hope to avoid a nuclear catastrophe. Amidst the ruin and chaos, a group of civilians scattered, ignoring or outright refusing the evacuation calls and search for the loved ones. Turning over every slab of rubble, every car, every fallen sign, they desperately called the names of those they'd come to find. A little girl named Madison held tightly in her mother's Emma's arm, cupped her hands over her ears as the adults around her, both familiar and not, continued crying out in vain. The result was similar to one cupped a seashell to their ears, with the world around her sounding like she was listening to it from beneath the ocean's wave. But the muddled, echoing cries from the frantically searching adults struck her eardrums despite her monumental efforts to shield herself from the reality they all faced. One voice in particular belonged to a man she knew well, the man who raised her, the man who sheltered her, the man she had known as indestructible her whole life, the man who never cried, snapped, or showed signs of fear, and the man who loved her with all his heart. Her father, Mark Russell, flashlight in hand, called to her elder brothers, whose face she could not find. "Andrew!" Mark shouted repeatedly. Mark's frantic search became became almost violently desperate. Every obstacle in his way was kicked, shoved, or thrown aside with as much force as he could muster, almost as if every single one of them was personally responsible for his grief. Madison's mother gently stroked her hair in a calm and quiet attempt to soothe Madison's growing anxiety. She had never seen her father this way before, tears streaming down his face like a raging rivers, his body movement full of stuttering confusion and uncertainty, and no matter how many times or how loudly he shouted Andrew's name, he received no reply, and against her will, Madison began to shake. "Where's Andy, Mama?" she asked quietly, hands still cupped to her ears. Her mother gave no response. She only continued staring at Mark as her own tears flowed silently down her cheeks, while she continued to stroke her beloved daughter's hair. Suddenly, a guttural clicking resounded behind them. All eyes snapped towards the source of the sound, and from the smoky haze surrounding the city's still standing skyscrapers erupted a colossal flying beast with long, slender legs and glowing red eyes. As it flapped its wings, a thunderclap was released, which sent a wave of air pressure hurtling across the earth below and knocked all of them to the ground. Soaring overhead and arching back towards the city, the creature disappeared, but following it was something much bigger, much bigger. Madison's eyes slid to the right from where the creature disappeared, and what she beheld, both literally and figuratively, took her breath away. A colossus, the likes of which she'd never seen before, burst through a small gap between two skyscrapers, knocking both towering structures to the ground on either side of itself in a horrific display of power and majesty. Debris and rubble fell upon it and bounced off its rugged reptilian flesh to the ground below, and with every step it took, it shook the ground enough that she felt it in her very bones. Mark observed the creature's feet as it stumped towards them, noting a familiar layout in the streets below as the location of where their dwellings lay here in San Francisco once stood. In the confusion and amidst the carnage, he'd been searching in the wrong location. No! Slam. A thundering footstep crushed what little hope Mark had left of finding Angel, as what remained of the arm disappeared beneath its massive clawed foot. Mark's hands outstretched and reaching towards it clenched into a fist as he looked up toward its head, high in the skies above. It didn't notice them. How could it notice them? All it was concerned about was finding the flying creature again. As the beast turned, its tail swept aside several city blocks, flinging hundreds of tons of rubble over the head and into the water of the bay. A few thunderous footsteps later, and the creature disappeared back into the haze of the city, but not without leaving them with a single ear-shattering roar. And the last thing Madison saw was the face of her father, shrieking in rage towards the creatures as its tail vanished into the gloom. Chapter 2 Aftershocks. Waking up from the nightmare of 5 years prior, the sensation of her daughter's head pressing into her shoulder still tingling as if she'd only just let go. Emma Russell blinked away her tears as she stared into the green forest beyond her window. Taking a moment to breathe, she glanced back towards a family portrait taken shortly before the incident. Her son, Andrew, seated with her arm draped over his shoulder. On the television, blared news about protests in the streets demanding the secretive organization, Monarch, be held accountable for the tragedy of San Francisco. Talk of massed die-offs in the oceans being linked to the effort to locate and track Godzilla, who hasn't been seen since the incident 5 years ago himself. Talk of Monarch, top brass such as Dr. Sarasaras and Graham being grilled as the government made motions to have Monarch fall under military jurisdiction. And finally, talks of the ideas that Monarch knew about yet more titans, yet kept hidden from the world. Following the closure of one particular broadcast about the day we discovered that monsters are real, Emma closed a black device with the Monarch symbol on its cover with a sharp click. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Madison, now 14 years old, with music blaring in her earbuds, scrolling through her emails until her eyes landed upon one titled, "How's it going?" from her father. With a single click, the email's content displayed the following: "Hey Madison, haven't heard from you guys in a few months. Hope you're having fun. Here's a few pics of the wolves I've been studying. Aren't they cute? Love, Dad." Scrolling through the images, one popped up that was unexpected and brought a small smile to her face. A picture of herself and her father while they'd been out fishing. Beginning to write back, Madison typed, "Hey Dad, sorry I haven't written back. I missed you. But there's something I want to talk to you about." Glancing towards her mother's bedroom momentarily, she continued, "I'm getting worried about Mom." Suddenly, the smoke alarm began blaring, easily cutting through the music in her ears. "Shh, shh, 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 shh," she cursed. She quickly lifted the plan, trying to desperately to save what was left of the breakfast bacon she'd been preparing for herself and Emma. "Oh, Maddie," came Emma's voice. "Good morning. Good morning, Mom." "Oh my God," Emma exclaimed as she rushed forward to turn off the stove top and fan the fire alarm. "I made us breakfast," Maddie said as Emma turned off the alarm. It's eggs, toast, and what was once bacon," she finished. Emma popped the toast out of the toaster. "And which do you recommend?" she asked with a smile. "The toast and eggs," Maddie replied, equally all smiles. As Madison moved to close her laptop, Emma spied it warily. "Coffee?" Maddie asked, grabbing the pot and beginning to pour her mother a cup. Emma's eye shifted once again to the laptop before returning nonchalantly to Madison. What were you working on?" Um, I was looking at recipes," Maddie replied swiftly. Sipping her coffee, Emma's eyes hardened. "For toast?" she asked, perhaps a bit more harshly than she could have. Knowing she was caught, Madison's face softened. "Dad's been emailing me, but he looks good, healthy," she said pensively. Emma's eyes once again shifted to the laptop, but only for an instant before returning to Madison. "Have you responded?" "Not yet," she replied. Emma remained silent. "Sugar?" Madison asked, holding out a packet for Emma. Her mother eyed it for a moment, and the corner of her mouth shifted slowly into a smile as she took it toward the end and poured in her desired amount. Stirring it gingerly with a spoon, she tapped the metallic utensil on the lip of the cup before setting it down on a napkin and taking a sip. "Good?" Maddie asked. "Mm-hmm," she replied, slowly nodding through a sip. A long silence ensued, during which time Maddie found it difficult to maintain eye contact with her mother's, whose gaze, while remaining relatively warm, was unwavering and unblinking. "So, anything else?" Maddie asked. Are you okay? Emma asked quietly. Yeah, why wouldn't I be? Emma's silence and unblinking gazes spoke volume, resulting in a frustrated sigh from Madison. Look, Mom, I'm fine, okay? You sure? Yes, Maddie snapped. Emma remained silent and sipped again at her coffee. Maddie, every time he reaches out, you seem more and more miserable. What would you think that? Why would you think that? Maddie, I'm fine, Mom. Seriously, it's just hard? Yeah. How so? Maddie tried to reply, but all she could muster was a tight-lipped shake of her head as her eyes started watering. You wanted to talk about it? Emma asked in a whisper. Maddie shook her head. Why not? Again, a shake of her head. Maddie, I'm your mother. You know you can tell me anything, right? Even if it's about him. Maddie's lip curled inward as she looked towards her laptop. I miss him, she managed at last. Emma's eyes closed slowly as she took a deep breath through her nose. Maddie, believe it or not, I miss him too. Yeah, sure, Maddie. If you miss him so much, then why not call him every now and then? Maddie shrieked. Emma leaned away in surprise, almost spilling her tea in her lap. You always try to act so calm, like everything's going to be alright, but you never talk to him. You never even mention him. All you do is lock yourself away and work on that thing you keep in the case. Emma's mouth hung slightly agape as she subtly shook her head, fighting for the will to form a response. That's hurting too. Why won't you let him be there for him? Why won't you let me be his daughter? Maddie backed away until she hit the cabinet behind her and slumped down to the floor. Wrapping her arms around her knees, she sobbed bitterly into the fabric of her jeans, leaving Emma dumbfounded and still struggling to reply. All she could do was sit on her stool with her hand shaking as it held her cup of coffee. Finally, Emma found her voice. I'm not ready to contact him yet, she said with a subtle quiver in her voice. She set her coffee down and walked around the table, kneeling next to Madison as she wrapped her arms around her shoulders. I don't think your father is ready to hear from me either. At least not yet, she whispered. How would you know? Maddie asked through gasps and sobs. Emma closed her eyes, pressing her cheeks gently into Maddie's scalp. Because I know him, Maddie. Do you? People change, you know. Emma had no response for that. All she could do was take in another deep breath as she kissed Madison's forehead. Maddie, I know this hasn't been easy for you. It hasn't been for any of us with all that's happened. But we'll get through this, Madison, together. Maddie finally looked up, her face smeared with tears as she sniffled and wiped her nose with her sleeve. You promise? Emma offered her best smile and gave Maddie's forehead another big kiss before whispering, I promise, against her ears and pulling her into a tight hug. Maddie, too tired to fight, relented and melted into it, wrapping her hands around her mother's forearm. Hey, want to hear some good news? She asked. Maddie nodded, and Emma pointed towards the black case which she had brought with her and set on the edge of the table. I finished it, Emma declared proudly. You think it's gonna work? Maddie asked quietly. Emma nodded. It's going to work. And less than 1 second after uttering the final syllable, the ground quaked beneath them. Emma held tightly to Madison as the wall shook. Loose items around the house trembled and fell over, and the lights overhead flickered on and off with a surge of power. And as the earth stilled, the high shriek of something unseen drew both of their attention to the nearby bay windows. Over the Radio came a voice. Dr. Russell, we need you in the containment. Emma slowly brought up the radio up as she wrapped an arm around Maddie. I'm on my way. With a confident smile, Emma's eyes set squarely on the majestic sight of a temple in the middle of the Yunnan rainforest, just beyond their dwelling. Chapter 3. Mothra. What the hell happened? Emma demanded. We've had no idea. She was sleeping like a baby until an hour ago, and then boom, her radiation levels went through the roof, almost like something triggered it. Thanks, Tim. You know I can take it from here. Why don't you get some rest? No way. Sleep or no sleep, I'm not missing this. As her mother and Tim continued to converse, Madison stopped to admire a carving in the walls. Despite being covered in vines and moss, it was beautifully preserved and depicted an enormous moth with a large circular symbols near the edge of its wings. On either side of the moth was a larva-like creature, presumably its spawns, or perhaps simply its first form. Walking up to it, Madison could feel a primal energy emanating from the stone. Glancing to the side at scientists taking photos, she waited until they turned away and reached out to touch her hand to the stone. It's warm, she whispered. A small tremor snapped her back to reality, and she dashed to catch up to her mother and Tim. Once on containment observation platform, Madison dropped her bag and walked up to the glass wall, separating her from the chamber where a giant plant-like oval spear sat, surrounded by lights and containment barriers. Within the spherical mass pulsed a blue light, accompanied by a soft, undulating sound, almost like a massive heartbeat. Sedatives? Emma asked. No effects. This thing wants to be born, Tim replied. But why? No idea. But best guess? Something's about to happen somewhere else in the world. Something involving another Titan? Perhaps, but it's only a theory. It must be responding to something, though for it to be cut off by a sudden flash from within the spear. Tim, Emma, and Madison looked on in wonder as it bulged near the top, before stretching higher and higher into the air, snapping the vines and cables holding it down. The pulsing grew brighter and brighter until it nearly blinded them, forcing them to turn away, and all the while a soft growl emanated from within. And at last, breaking free from the spherical prison, emerged a massive insectoid creature whose body pulsed with that same blue bright light. That same warmth Madison felt from the stone began coursing through her body, and her hands found its way to her heart as she felt it beating faster and faster. The titanic larvae turned around towards the containment team on the platforms around it, staring curiously between them as Tim's voice broke through to Madison's ear. Meet Titanus Mothra, or as we like to call her, Mothra. Madison finished, a large smile spreading on her face. Incredible, Emma echoed softly, voicing the surrounding. They all felt inside. Voicing the wonder they all felt inside. As Mothra continued to analyze her surroundings, an artificial voice echoed through the chamber. Activating containment grid. Suddenly, beams of lights surrounded Mothra, rising from the floor to the ceiling, catching her off guard and causing her to rear up with a gasp of confusion. But no sooner had this taken place than the beams of light turned red as a warning alarm began blaring. What's happening? Emma demanded. Mothra, meanwhile, had had enough. She roared loudly and turned to the side, her body slamming the edge of the platform the containment team stood upon. Something's really wrong here. Our containment systems are failing all across the premises, and the whole network is going insane, Team exclaimed. What do you mean? How is that possible? Someone else has to be doing this. Mothra bellowed in the chamber, slamming her tail and down, causing a large tremor. Emma grabbed the intercom. Containment team, stand down. I repeat, stand down. You're scaring her. Mothra leaned forward and growled at one of the team members, who, in a panic, raised his weapons and fired an electric pulse into Mothra's flesh. In response, Mothra slammed one of her legs onto the platform next to him, causing him to retreat backward until the momentum carried him over the edge as he dropped his weapons. Another, another team member sent a pulse into her, with Mothra rearing up angrily and, in retaliation, spewing a high-pressure silk stream into him and several others around him. The force carried them through the railing and to the floor below. Then another stream, and another, and another. One by one, the containment team members fell to her as she crashed through the chamber and their prepared defenses. One of them was even taken into her jaws and thrown into a web of silk she cast on the wall. Tim reached for a switch, but was stopped by Emma. Dr. Russell, I'm sorry, but you know our protocols. We have to terminate. No, I can handle this, Emma retorted. Grabbing the orca, Emma made for the doors, separating observation deck from the chamber. Mom, no! Maddie barked, trying to stop her. Madison, stay here. It's going to work, I promise. Maddie was reluctant to let go, but relented as her mother swiped her badge against the ID scanner and allowed her passage through. As the doors opposite began opening, Mothra continued her rampage through the chamber, knocking over one of the large statues which she had seemed to perceive as a threat in her panicked state. Spotting Emma, Mothra hunched forward and let out a warning roar. It's okay, Emma whispered. Cautiously inching forward, Mothra smacked the platform with her jaws, causing Emma's steps to falter. Steadying herself on the railing, Emma continued to inch forward slowly. Mothra began to rear up, flushing her body with a red light as a warning to Emma that she had come close enough. Emma complied and stopped her advance. Instead, she knelt down, lowering her body as far as she could while opening the orca. As it was activated, Mothra tilted her head in curiosity. Emma activated a scan of Mothra's bioacoustic, and this scan, as well as the sound it produced, forced Mothra to shake her head and retaliate at the sound with a small stream of silk which barely missed Emma. Madison flung herself at the glass, slamming it with her hand, crying out for her mother. But Emma remained poised. She leaned in again and shifting some of her settings on the orca, tightening the focus of the scan and preparing for something new. But Mothra was not done. She released another stream which caught Emma's right arm, pinning it to the railing. Madison had seen enough. She reached back and swiped Tim's badge before dashing to the ID scanner and slamming the card against it. The device allowed her passage. She closed the door just as the first scientist reached it to try and stop her, locking them out. The door opposite slid open and Madison ran forward at top speed to her mother's side. Maddie, what the hell are you doing? Go back, Emma cried. No, I won't leave you like this. Martha released another stream of silk at Madison, who was only just able to lean over the railing to avoid it. A single strand caught the edge of her jacket and almost pulled it off her. Maddie had to wriggle out of the jacket, leaving it behind, and dash forward to help her mother to pull her arm out of the silk as Mothra bellowed once again, shaking the ground beneath her. With her hands free at last, Emma opened a new search in the Orca starter base. Mothra, meanwhile, reared up as high as she could, her head almost touching the ceiling, and as she began lunging forwards towards the pair, the Orca read, Alpha frequency found. Pressing the large blue button on the right side, Emma grabbed hold of Maddie and held her close as Mothra's escaping ball moved ever closer. But finally, at the last possible moment, the Orca activated the frequency on a loud, steady pulse, and instantly all went quiet. Mothra cased her attack mere feet away from the pair, her body now back to glowing with a soft blue light, and her once aggressive roars had become soft, gentle warbles as she backed away and gazed at the pair again with curiosity. Slowly, they looked up at her, and she continued to stare at them almost expectantly. Son of a bitch, Tim whispered. Madison and Emma slowly stood up, and Mothra began leaning in towards them. Madison made it to her feet first and slowly slid her feet across the metal grating beneath her as she raised her hands out towards the larvae. And as she did so, Madison could swear that she started to hear music, a soft, subtle chorus of a female voice singing a beautiful, graceful melody. Was this just her mind playing tricks on her? Maybe just a song she was remembering from way back then? It didn't matter anymore. Madison's body grew warmer as her hand grew closer and closer to Mothra, whose head was now low enough that she was almost crawling on the platform. Closer and closer and closer. She inched towards Madison until the girl's hand was mere inches away. Emma, despite the danger they'd just shared, smiled ear to ear with pride. Not only pride in the Orca for working as they promised, but in Madison for having the courage to reach out towards a Titan in such a calm, benevolent manner. Mothra suddenly let out a small growl which forced them both back a step, but Madison could only chuckle as her mother steadied her. Emma turned around towards Tim, smiling knowingly, and he smiled back with a subtle nod of his head. However, bam! An explosion erupted from the walls behind him, shattering the beautiful stone carving, followed swiftly by a hail of bullets. Mothra reared up to observe the source of the new sounds as Emma shielded Madison's eyes from the chaos that was now ensuing. Bullets after bullets was fired until the only one left was Tim, who slowly stood up with hands in the air as a figure he recognized but dreaded to ever meet emerged from the smoking hole in the wall. They shared a silent exchange from the briefest moment before a pistol was raised, and a bullet was placed right between Tim's eye. Madison gasped as her mother continued to shield her eye, but Emma, despite the suddenness of the attack, seemed far too calm. Her breath was slightly more rapid than usual, but her face and eyes betrayed her knowledge that this had been coming, and the smile the man who shot Tim gave her spoke volumes to his own expectation of this outcome. Slowly, he looked up at Mothra, and she down at him, and that sinister smile grew slightly wider as he looked down and beheld the Orca pulling with alpha frequency found. Chapter 4: A Husband and Father. A television screen playing a back footage of the San Francisco battle between Godzilla and the Mutos played as a colleague of Dr. Sarasara addressed a gathering of U.S. senators. What we are witnessing here, senators, is the return of an ancient and forgotten superspecies, Godzilla, the Mutars, Kong. Monarch is a uniquely qualified to determine which of these titans are here to threaten us and which of these titans are here to protect us. Thank you for the 5th grade history lesson, Mr. Coleman. But we still haven't heard one good reason why Monarch shouldn't fall under military jurisdiction, or why these creatures shouldn't be exterminated, the head senator replied. Monarch was tasked with finding and destroying these radioactive monsters, he continued, as Dr. Serizawa shared a glance with Admiral William Stans, who shifted slightly in his seat while taking a deep breath. But you either can't or won't tell us how many there are or why they are showing up. So maybe it's time for the military to put them down, she concluded. Killing them would be a mistake. Serizawa began a response. They returned because of us. It was our atomic testing in the 40s that awoke Godzilla. Other creatures like the Mutas were awoken by strip mining and seismic surveys, but these are not monsters. They are animals rising to reclaim a world that was once theirs. It almost sounds like you're protecting them, Dr. Saras, as if you admire them. I admire all forms of life, he retaliated sternly. Senators, if we hope to survive, we must find a way to coexist with Titans. With Gojira, he concluded. A sort of symbiotic relationship, if you will, like the lion and the mouse, Dr. Grahams added. Or the scorpion and the frog, the senator retorted. So, you'd want to make Godzilla our pet? She asked incredulously. No, we will be his, Serizawa countered, much to the amusement of all the non-monarch staff in the room. Suddenly, Dr. Graham's phone begins vibrating. Oh. No. Actually, that's not what Serizawa meant, Mr. Coleman tried to say to calm the room. Dr. Graham showed the phone to Serizawa, who immediately stood up and jerked his head towards the door. She responded with a sharp nod, and the pair of them began making for the exit. Dr. Serizawa, Dr. Graham, this hearing is not adjourned. I hope you both realize the consequence of walking out that door, the senator called after them. You know what, senators? Well, I'll confer with my colleagues here. I'm gonna set you up with a very brief and pretty fun documentary on Titan reproduction. I think this is the one where the genitals are blurred out. But if not, you can leave a comment with my assistant, Coleman said, running after the doctors as the screen showed the male and female mutos nuzzling behind a blurred circle of censorship. Meanwhile in Colorado, a pack of wolves were hard at work tearing apart carcasses of the buck they just brought down. Their snout were still covered in fresh blood as they growled and grunted and barked at one another while establishing the pecking order. Looking at them through the lens of his long-distance camera, shielded by a fallen tree trunk, Mark Russell snapped pictures and after pictures while listening carefully to the vocalization through a directional microphone mixer connected to his computer. He closed his eyes as he processed the sounds in his head, filling them into various memorized categories in his brain while they continued their feast. However, the sound of helicopter blades whirring caught this and the wolves' attention. They scattered into the trees nearby as Mark took off his headphones and stood to observe the chopper coming down to the clearing nearby. And his eyes landed on the Monarch symbol on the bottom and side. His jaws immediately went rigid. The sight of Serizawa and Graham emerging didn't help his mood any either. At his cabin nearby, Serizawa and Graham gave him a brief update. The feed cuts there, Graham said, showing him the last available footage of Madison and Emma being escorted out the temple by the mysterious man and his crew. As he watched, Mark's jaw was set, his lip tight, and his eyes practically on fire as he looked towards Graham while she continued our part of the briefing. The few survivors we recovered haven't given us much more than what the footage allows, but we have confirmed that Emma and Madison were the only one taken, she concluded. I'm sorry, Mark, Cerisa whispered. Sorry? Mark replied softly, his tight-lipped frown turning into a half smile as he slowly stood up and leaned in with both of his hands on the table. Sorry isn't going to bring them back, he snapped. Serizawa's own lips tightened a bit, but he took a breath and nodded slowly. Mark slowly sat down, his hands clenching in fists before one of them ran through his hair. I should have been there for them, he whispered, his hand in his hair tightening around a tuft of it and tugging slightly. His head shook left to right a few times as he bared his top row of teeth from behind his lip, trying to calm himself. Who are they? He asked quietly. We don't know yet, but Graham replied as she walked towards the video monitor and using its touch control, she began zooming in on the orca in Emma's hand. We believe they were after this. Mark looked back and forth between them. You didn't, he said in disbelief. It's the orca, Coleman replied. That's why we think they needed Emma. She believed that if we could replicate the biosonar the Titan used to communicate. I know what the hell it is. I helped build the prototype, Mark snapped as he looked back and forth between Graham and Serizawa. Who's he? He asked. Sam Coleman. I'm the head of the technology. I joined Monarch shortly after you left. I'm a big fan of your wife's work. And you. And that you just came out so weird. I'm sorry. Sam stuttered. Emma. And I destroyed the prototype, Mark said on a growl. And then Emma decided to rebuild it. After San Francisco, she went to Boston to spend the last several years developing it. She thought it could help, Graham tried to say. Would help what? To play God? Mark retorted angrily. No. To help prevent another attack, Graham tried to say in defense. The Orca was a grad school science project. It was meant to keep whales away from the shoreline and stop the mass beach dives off. It wasn't meant for you to talk to your little creature out there, Mark began. Listen to me. They'll think it's one of them. But if you use the wrong frequency on one of them, then you're going to be responsible for 1,000 San Franciscos, he whispered forcefully. Which is why we need to get it back. Emma always said nobody knew the orca better than you, Serizawa stated calmly. It shouldn't even exist, Mark retorted, moving to the window to try and calm himself. That may be, Mark, but it does. And now it's fallen into the wrong hands. And right now, the orca is the only thing keeping Emma and Madison alive, Sam said, trying to defuse the situation. Mark turned around and stomped towards Sam, grabbing his lapels and slamming him into the walls as Serizawa and Graham both tried to pull him away. You think I don't know that? Mark screamed, pushing Sam into the wall that much harder. That's my ex-wife and my daughter you're talking about. And those who the hell's terrorists of some kind. You'd think I don't know their lives are in danger and hanging by a thread, he yelled. Mark, stop this, Serizawa yelled. Please let him go, Graham added. I'm sorry. I was only trying to help, Sam begged. Help what? help me remember how close they are to a bullet in the head? Mark yelled. Finally, Mark let go of his arm and shoved Serizawa and Graham aside as he walked back to the window and slammed his head out on the sill, making all three of them of the others flinch. His breathing was heavy, his jaws tight, teeth bared and eyes swelling with tears he was now trying to hold back. His finger raked against the wood, leaving scratch marks behind as they clenched into fists. I lost one family member to a monster 5 years ago, and now I'm this close to losing all of them to even more monsters. Not as bad as the first one, mind you, but monsters are all the same, he growled, turning his head slowly and glaring at Sam out of the corner of his eyes. You've had no idea what that feels like, do you? To lose a family to a monster? He asked on a low, soft, menacing whisper. Sam gulped and shook his head. Mark huffed through his nose and stomped to his refrigerator, grabbing a bottle of water from the first shelf. But as he was about to close the door, he spied an unopened beer bottle labeled Safety Net. Looking at it for a long moment, he shut his eyes and slowly closed the door, with his hand trembling as he let go of the handle. As Mark took a swig of water, Dr. Graham came forward. Mark, please. We know you're hurting, but if we find that the orca, we'll find your family, and I promise, she said calmly. Mark unclenched his fist, followed by a deep breath, and turned swiftly on his heels. When do we leave? He demanded. Chapter 5. Something bigger. The Monarch chopper raced through the air, through a sea of clouds, descending just low enough to be out of the way of the turbulence, while seeing the beauty of the ocean beneath and the setting sun on the horizon. When was the last time you spoke to Emma? Graham asked. About 3 years ago, and it wasn't a happy conversation, he admitted. After San Francisco, we went back home to Boston, tried to put the pieces back together. Emma dealt with it by doubling down on work and saving the world, and I started drinking, he said, his voice quivering ever so slightly. He glanced out the window towards the horizon as one of his hands clenched to a fist. He closed his eyes momentarily as a stream of memories seared through his mind. As he opened his hands and his eyes, he looked back over at Dr. Graham. I can't tell you how much I hated myself for letting Maddie see me that way, he whispered. Dr. Graham gave him a sympathetic nod of her head, as she had nothing to offer of comfort to such statement. Uh, we mind if we cut in here? Sam asked. It's just, you're gonna want to see this, he said, handing Mark a tablet. Emma combined the biocastic of different titans to create the Orca signal, a sort of baseline frequency that all creatures seem to respond to, attracting them, repelling them, even at times calming them down. It's pretty remarkable, actually, he said, getting lost in his excitement over the concept. The problem is, we don't know which titans she combined, but if you can identify those frequencies, we'll be back able to track the Orca and find Emma and Madison, Graham stated optimistically. Jesus, Mark whispered. How many of these things are there? He asked. 17 and counting after Godzilla, Serizawa stated. 17? Mark asked, totally aghast. Most of them were discovered in this deep hibernation, while others were contained at a top secret sites around the globe. Cambodia, Mexico, Skull Island. We even found one in Wyoming. They're everywhere, Graham said softly. Why don't you kill him? Mark asked. The government wants to. But Emma and I believe some are benevolent, Serizawa replied. Mark could barely form a response to what he just heard. His mouth opened partway, but failed to form a word for long enough before he found his voice and whispered angrily at Serizawa. Don't kid yourself. Uh, hey, look at that! We're here, Sam said, breaking the tense silence which had formed in the chopper. Mark handed the tablet to Graham and moved to the to the front of the chopper to see where he here was, and out of the foggy haze emerged a lonely landing platform for the chopper. Bravo, this is Raptor 1 on direct approach. They arrived at Castle Bravo, Monarch Outpost 54 in Bermuda, and as the chopper circled around what looked like a simple shipping container platform, split apart and opened a massive tunnel leading down below the Earth's the ocean's surface large enough for a helicopter to descend through. And as the chopper descended, Mark couldn't help but marvel at the technology which had created this massive underwater structure. The tunnel almost seemed to go on forever. This is new, he remarked. Yeah, we call it Castle Bravo, our new flagship facility, built to track and study Godzilla on his new home turf, Sam said. I thought he was missing, Mark retorted. Well, only if you don't know where to look, Sam replied with a smile. The head of the female Muto Godzilla had killed 5 years ago sat in a massive open section of the facility, with numerous platforms and catwalks erected around it, undoubtedly for study purposes. Mark looked at it and scowled, remembering its mate, and Godzilla had done to his family residence in San Francisco and what they had done to his son, Andrew. He clenched his teeth and huffed through his nose before following Graham and Zarasawa further into the massive facility. As you know, it's approximately 0700 hours. Our containment site in China's Yaman rainforest was raided. The specimen, codenamed Mothra, escaped, but she cocooned herself later under a nearby waterfall. Graham began. Wait, wait, why a waterfall? Don't insect normally dislike water? One of the other asked. Preliminary scans show that Mothra's internal temperature is significantly greater than what would expect of an insectoid life form. We suspect it because of a massively increased metabolism and her radioactive properties, Graham continued. We theorized that she chose the waterfall for two reasons. One, to help regulate her temperature, and two, because it offers a passive form of defenses against any predatory lifeform that may try to find and attack her, Sam added. Back on point, Dr. Emma Russell and her daughter Madison were taken hostage. This man this is the man responsible. A picture of the man's face appeared on screen, and Mark's hands, previously rested calmly on the table, unconsciously clenched into a fist. After sending his facial scans to our agent in the field, we discovered his name is Alan Jonah. He's a former British army colonel turned eco-terrorist. He's obsessed with restoring the natural order. Neither he nor his followers care who they have to hurt or kill to return this world to Mother Nature, Graham stated. A group of fanatics, in short, Sam added. To fund his operation, he began transfac- transfecting in a new and dangerous market, Titan DNA. Graham continued. What the hell is someone gonna do with a giant worm? Asked one of the soldiers. Are you kidding me, Martins? You can't do what can't you do with it? pharmaceuticals, bioweapons, food. Hell, there isn't a country or company on the planet that wouldn't want to get its hand on one of these suckers. And don't forget, it's just a larva, a baby. After it cocoons itself and something else is gonna crawl out. Something bigger and meaner. We don't know that, Rick. A woman of a Chinese descent retorted. Oh yeah? Just wait for it, Chan, Rick replied. Dr. Chan rolled her eyes at Rick as another lead soldiers stepped out to begin her section of the briefing. Our intel indicates that Jonah wants to capture the specimen alive, and this means that he and his MERS won't be far behind. At 0500, we'll ship out to launch a joint operation. I won't bother, Mark interjected. Excuse me, she asked. This sounds like a duck hunt to me, he continued. Mark, we don't. Why don't we let the Colonel Foster finish? Sam tried to say politely. It's a decoy, a diversion. How many ways do I have to describe it? Marx asked as he stood from his chair. Look, they've already got Emma and the Orca. Why would they just want this one when they got the keys to your entire magic kingdom of horrors back here? He asked, gesturing to the screen behind him, which showed the locations of all Titans and the facilities housing them worldwide. I think they want you to go after this Mothra so they can go after a real prize. Something bigger, he concluded. Serizawa and Graham silently shared a brief, concerned glance with one another as both their eyes shifted between a few key facilities on the map on the walls. Africa, Eastern Europe, and Antarctica. Right, Colonel Foster said, her head tilted slightly. Mark, this is not the first specimen they captured. They know what they are doing, Serizawa said. That's not just a specimen. I got an ex-wife and a daughter out there, in case you'd forgotten, Mark growled. No, no one has forgotten that, Mark, Sam replied. But to remind you, we were brought on here to help track the Orca and to advise us. He tried to continue. I advise you to kill these things. All of them. Especially him, he said, pointing to a picture of Godzilla rising out of the water behind him. You want to make sure these things don't fall into the wrong hands? You'll kill them. The Orca's useless, he stated flatly. Serizawa and Graham both looked away and sighed through their noses. Serizawa's rubbing the bridge of his nose. Emma wouldn't have wanted that, even to save her life, Dr. Chan retorted calmly. Well, it wouldn't be the first time Emma put all of this before herself or her family, would it? Mark asked. Dr. Chan had no answer for that, and all she could do, along with everyone else, was watch Mark walk out the room without another word. Dude hates Titans, another soldier said. Well, yeah, you would too, if you were him, Sam said quietly in Mark's defense.